Morning laid a thin mist over the damp earth, where droplets clung to the edges of pale roses by the stone gate. Ivy curled across the mansion's ancient walls, like fingers trying to hold on to time. A soft breeze stirred, carrying the scent of aged wood, faded lavender, and the quiet hum of a place long accustomed to silence. Isabel Reyes stood still before the tall iron gate, her fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of a worn suitcase. She hadn't come looking for love. She came because her mother was sick, because prescription bills were taller than hope. But from the moment cold winds swept through the graystone hallways, from the first glance of a man who no longer spoke, Isabel knew destiny had just whispered in a language she didn't yet understand. This house had rules, closed doors, and a man upstairs no one was allowed to touch. And yet, within those same walls, she would learn that some silences are not the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper. An unspoken call, a heartbeat carefully hidden from the world. The soft crunch of gravel under old wheels startled Isabel. The Devereaux estate slowly emerged from the mist like a forgotten fortress, tall, cold, and guarded by rules that had never been broken. The oak door creaked open to reveal an elderly woman with silver hair pinned into a perfect knot, her uniform unwrinkled and her gaze unreadable. "Miss Reyes, I presume?" Her voice was smooth and sharp as stone. "I'm Mrs. Halberg, head housekeeper. You're early. That speaks well of you." Isabel bowed her head. Mrs. Halberg didn't invite. She turned and walked. Isabel hurried after her, the echo of her footsteps reverberating through the vast foyer like prayers in a chapel. Dark wood walls, a silent chandelier, and time standing still. "There are things you need to remember," Mrs. Halberg said, stopping before a Venetian mirror that reflected Isabel's anxious face. "You'll clean at scheduled hours. Don't move personal items. Ask no unnecessary questions. And above all," her eyes cut like glass, "under no circumstances are you to enter the room at the end of the second-floor hallway." Isabel nodded, but the weight of that final rule planted a seed not even fear could smother: curiosity. They passed long corridors layered in thick carpets, ancient portraits watching in still silence. "Mr. Devereaux lives there?" She gestured faintly with her chin toward the closed wooden door at the corridor's end. "Since the accident, he doesn't speak, doesn't let anyone touch him, and I suggest you don't romanticize anything." Isabel swallowed hard, unaware that behind that very door, Julian Devereaux's eyes, trapped somewhere between memory and survival, had already seen her first. That day, the sky was the color of old stone, heavy and gray, like the faces of the statues that lined the porch. The air smelled of damp stone, and everything in the house moved slower than usual. Isabel was dusting the dining room when a strange noise drifted down from the second floor, something that sounded like silence cracking. Minutes later, Mrs. Halberg appeared, her face unusually pale. "Mr. Julian has a fever," she whispered, barely breathing. "Won't let anyone in. Won't let the nurse touch him. You have to try." Isabel blinked. "He let you in once. Maybe he will again." Julian's room was dim, lit only by thin slivers of light slipping past thick curtains. The air was dense, filled with the scent of medicine, sweat, and something else entirely. Something waiting to break. He lay on the bed, shirt unbuttoned, skin flushed with fever, forehead glistening with sweat. He turned as he heard her soft steps, his gaze smoldering, like a wall fractured but not yet fallen. Isabel dipped a cloth in cool water, her fingers trembling. She whispered, almost pleading, "I just want to help." Julien didn't speak, but he didn't turn away. The cold cloth touched his skin. He shivered, but did not resist. She wiped gently across his forehead, down his cheeks, along his neck. The scars revealed themselves, twisting lines of memory inked onto his body. Her fingers grazed a deeper one. Julian held his breath. She began to pull away, but he tilted his head, urging her to continue. In that moment, Isabel felt, for the first time, she wasn't intruding. She was being allowed. She changed the water several times. Each time she returned, Julian's eyes followed her, unwavering. When she leaned in to cool the back of his neck, his hand suddenly closed around her wrist. Not hard, not harsh, just a grip, like holding on to something slipping away. Isabel froze, her heart pounding in her chest. They stared at each other, and in that second, there was no patient, no maid, only a man holding a woman's hand, afraid to let go. The next morning, rain fell without pause, blurring the laundry room window like watercolor running on glass. Isabel had just tied on her apron when Mrs. Hallberg appeared again, looking more weary than usual. "He's refusing again," she said, not needing to explain who. "Won't allow anyone near for personal care." The air around Isabel seemed to thicken. "What should I do?" "Help him bathe. The room is equipped. Be mindful of his scars. Don't press too hard." The bathroom was warm, heavy with steam. Julian was already seated on the special chair, a towel draped across his lap, dark hair tousled, bare chest exposed, bearing the marks of what had once broken him. Their eyes met through the mirror. Isabel hesitated, but Julian gave a small nod, as if granting silent permission. She picked up the sponge and began with his shoulders, soft, circular motions. Water traced the lines of his body, sliding across scars like memories waking up. Julian closed his eyes, breathing slowly, but each time Isabel's hand passed over a tender spot, she saw his chest subtly tighten. She tried to stay composed, but her fingers betrayed her. They trembled. When it came time to wash his hair, she took a deep breath, working shampoo through the dark strands. Her fingers slid gently across his scalp, down to the nape of his neck. Julian let out a soft sound, a breath, barely a whisper, but it cracked the silence like ice beneath pressure. She paused. They met each other's gaze in the mirror. His eyes now bore into hers, not guarded, not afraid, only longing, and something that felt like gratitude. Julian turned the chair to face her. Without looking away, he raised his hand and touched hers. Isabel stepped toward him, drawn by something she couldn't name. The first touch, his lips against the back of her hand, made her heart falter. The second, on her lips, was a whisper neither of them knew how to say aloud. The steam thickened around them, hiding everything but the two of them. Isabel didn't remember who moved first, only that they were suddenly close, achingly real, and that kiss wasn't possession, it was salvation. When she finally pulled back, heart racing, she found Julian still watching her, the same way, as if the world had tilted just because they touched. That night, as she lay in bed, heart still pounding, Isabel felt more vulnerable than ever. What they shared in the steam was no longer something she could tuck away. It demanded to be named, and she wasn't ready. Isabel didn't return the next day. Mrs. Hallberg called early in the morning, her tone as steady as ever, though tinged with impatience. Isabel claimed she had a cold, said she needed a day to rest, nothing serious. But that wasn't the truth. She wasn't sick. She was hiding from something her heart was still trembling to name. A touch, a kiss, a gaze that should never have belonged to someone like her. What had passed between her and Julian, in steam, in silence, was both gentle and dangerously real. She lay motionless in her small room, the thin blanket draped across her as she stared blankly at the ceiling. In her mind, the images replayed endlessly. His eyes when he turned to her, the softness of his grasp, the breath that slipped from a throat long silent. Isabel lifted her fingers to her lips, touching the spot where he had kissed her. Not a demanding kiss, but one that simply asked her to stay. And somehow, everything still lingered, not on her skin, but deeper, as though it had melted into her blood. At the estate, Julian was quieter than ever. He refused the nurse, refused treatment, refused food. He looked at no one, wrote nothing. He simply sat there, staring out the window, toward the path where Isabel used to appear each morning. His wheelchair, once rolled through the hallway, now remained just inside his door. He didn't leave the room. It was as if he too was waiting for something to return. For the first time since the accident, Julian felt the urge to scream. But no sound came out. His throat burned, his chest tightened. He had been close to speaking, so close, and then she vanished, and everything sank back into silence. Only this time, the silence hurt. On the second morning, Isabel received a message. "Mr. Devereaux is not cooperating. Your presence is required." One short sentence, and her heart clenched. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but because she knew she wanted to go back. Desperately. But what would it mean to return? An apology? A new beginning? Or falling even deeper into something she couldn't control? She closed her eyes, burying her face into her pillow, and for the first time in a long, long while, Isabel wept. Not out of exhaustion, or even guilt, but because she had touched something real and had no idea how to hold on to it. The morning Isabel returned, the sky was still gray, just like the first time she arrived. The wind rustled through the ivy along the terrace, carrying with it the old scent of dust, time, and unnamed memories. Mrs. Hallberg said nothing upon seeing her. She merely nodded and handed her a ring of old keys. "Attic," she said, then turned away. "We need space for new rehabilitation equipment." The attic was thick with dust and the stale smell of years gone by. Isabel moved slowly among old trunks, draped fabrics, cracked wood. Inside a loosely locked wooden chest, she found a bundle of photographs and letters tied with a faded ribbon. Among them, one photo made her pause. Julian, standing beside a radiant blonde woman. On the back it simply read, "Jay and Elise, 4th anniversary." She sat down. Her hands trembled as she opened a letter in soft, elegant handwriting. It had been written 3 days before the accident. "My dearest Julian, by the time you read this, I may already be gone. The doctors say I don't have much time. I chose to leave early, not because I've given up, but because I want you to remember me as I was, light, not shadow. I know you'll blame yourself, but please don't. I don't want my leaving to become a prison for your heart. If one day someone comes along who makes your eyes light up again, please don't turn her away. No one replaces anyone. True love doesn't take space. It finds its own. And if she's reading this with you now, I hope she understands. She hasn't stolen anything. She's starting something new." Isabel didn't realize she was crying until her hands were wet. She pressed the letter to her chest, her breath unsteady, as if the words had unlocked something buried deep. The letter still lay open in her lap when a sound startled her. A voice, low and rough, but calling her name. "Isabel!" She turned. Julian was there, in the doorway of the attic, his hand resting lightly on the wheel of his chair. But this time, he had spoken. Since that day in the attic, something had shifted in Julian. His voice was still rough, still broken in places, but every time Isabel came, he tried. One word, then two, then a full sentence. The silence that had gripped him for months was now beginning to thaw, like winter ice surrendering to the first warmth of spring. Mrs. Hallberg, who had watched everything in quiet restraint, smiled genuinely as she handed Isabel a small box. "He wants you to wear this tonight. There's a special dinner." Inside was a silk dress, navy blue, flowing like water and delicate as the care behind its choice. Isabel stood before the mirror, fingertips brushing the fabric. Never had she felt so out of place and yet so utterly right. The glass garden room at the southern end of the estate glowed under soft golden lights. Twinkling strands wove through the vines. Flowers bloomed in silent applause. A round table stood at the center, draped in white, candles flickering gently. Julian appeared at the far end of the corridor. He wasn't in a wheelchair, but standing, one hand resting lightly on a cane, each step slow but steady. Isabel couldn't breathe. She stepped forward, heart pounding against her ribs. "I practiced every night," Julian said haltingly, voice still fragile but firm. "Every morning, before you arrived, because I wanted to stand near you." Isabel covered her mouth. Her tears brimmed. Julian reached into his coat pocket, hand slightly trembling, and pulled out a small, velvet box. "I can't promise a perfect life," he said, "but I can promise every step, every word, every heartbeat will be for you." Isabel didn't answer with words. She nodded, tears spilling. Julian slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into an embrace, soft as if afraid he might break something too fragile. But in that moment they both knew. The most fragile things are also the most real. A few mornings later, the sun rose earlier than usual, crisp and quiet. The garden doors were slightly ajar, letting in the morning mist and the scent of freshly blooming roses. Isabel walked down the long corridor, her heart light, no longer weighed down, only guided by its own rhythm. In the garden, Julian stood against the old stone railing, his cane set aside. He turned as he heard her familiar steps. For the first time, there was no searching, no question, just one look, and he knew she had chosen to stay. "You came," he said, no longer hesitant, his voice still low, still husky, but no longer fragile. It was real now, a sound built not on chance but on belief, and the woman standing before him. Isabel smiled and stepped beside him. She didn't ask anything, didn't explain. Some moments in life aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be lived. Julian wrapped an arm around her waist, tentative but steady. "I once thought I'd live the rest of my life in silence." Isabel looked up at him. "And now? Now I have you. No more words needed. No perfect ending required. Just a beginning. Quiet as the breeze threading through her hair. Steady as a heartbeat between two people who dared to face fear and chose to stay." And in the place once filled with walls, silence, and scars, a new voice had finally been born, made of love, of patience, and of truth.